Like I said, I'm so excited to introduce Reverend Dr. Kelly Jackson Brooks. She is the Executive Director of Chrysalis Consulting Center. She holds a Doctor of Ministry focused in clergy mental health, a master's degree in counseling, a master's degree in divinity, and is a licensed professional mental health counselor. And she's ordained deacon, right?
I am.
So yay. So I'm so excited to have Kelly be with us today, and she is going to share all about mental health pieces that will be helpful for us. She's just going to have a presentation, and then we'll have time for Q&A. All right. Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. And I, wanted to talk a little bit more about who I am. And as we go along, open for questions as we go. There's a lot of information here, and I do like kind of the back and forth as we go. This is a big topic, and I know there's a lot here, and we all have so many things going through our head when it comes to children and adolescents and mental health, because this is where we all start. We all come from childhood. We all come from adolescence. So we all have some grounding and understanding in this. What I always like to say is, one, every experience is different. And certainly the generation that's coming up now is so different than what we experienced, as they always are. But I think of my own kiddo. She's 13. And, when she was 3 years old in her childcare, I still remember this, is when she began active shooter drills. And I remember this because I thought, why is this happening? Oh yeah, because Sandy Hook just happened. And so they began this. And so this generation of kids have had this their entire lives. So this reality of not just this thing that's out there, of will this happen one day? Or may this happen, this theoretical fear or threat is very much a reality. So these kids that we have of these things that happen in their world of effects on mental health are quite real to them. So we have all these statistics and all these things of outside threats that they have lived with that is really different than us. So for us to have an understanding of where our kids are, to keep that in the back of our minds, that is really different than us, because wherever you're coming from, my generation had the Challenger. That was our threat, which isn't the same as what our kids have now. So to just kind of keep that as a basis as we continue on in our conversation of children and youth. So thank you again for that introduction. And I'm sorry to kind of put some gloom in the conversation. I don't want to do that because kids are so amazing. I also want to say, I think children have this wonderful ability to adapt. The word pivot drives me crazy, but I think it's a real good word in many ways. We've heard that word way too many times in the past few years, but I think being adaptable is the children's kind of mantra, and they've got that innate ability to do so. I also love kids because they have this wonderful way about them that they see spirit that we don't. And we put things on them that I think blocks them from seeing spirit. So to keep these things also in our mindset that they are just beams of light, and to try to remove those blocks that we put in them at all times. So yes, things are hard in their lives, and yes, things have happened, but they also have this wonderful ability to see spirit that we don't always have, that we've put these blocks in our ways. So let's try to not put them in their way. Okay, so those are kind of things that I want to put out there as we continue in this conversation. So yes, I am a licensed therapist. That was my first joy in life. My mother is actually an ordained Methodist pastor, so that was something I was not going to do because we were the first to arrive at church and we were the last to leave. And as hard as my mother tried, my brother and I knew all the things about the church. Right. And that's the good and the bad and the beautiful and the not so beautiful. So that was a calling that I think I put aside for a long time. but embraced at some point and said, okay, I love the counseling. I love that. And how do you embrace all of it? And that is certainly in the calling of the deacon. So I am biased to the role of the deacon because I think it embraces all of those things. So calling for the deacon and what I do work in a church. I'm appointed to a local church. I work as an executive pastor. So I do all those things that I work in the money part, I work in the staff part, but I also get to work in the part of ministry and see what the church can be in the world. I also have that nonprofit part where I get to work with clergy and look at mental health for clergy. And I get to work with clergy kids and pastor kids because I have a deep love for that because I was a pastor kid. When I was in private practice as a mental health therapist, I worked with children and adolescents. So that's where all this kind of stuff comes together with kids and why we're talking here today in those roles of children and youth mental health. I also want to start with this story, and I was talking with Kathy a little earlier about this. I'm not going to name the concert I went to, but I've been thinking a lot about this. Just a few days ago, my 13-year-old daughter and I went to a concert, and she begged me to go to this concert. As we all know, when you have a teenager and they say, please, 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 let's go to this concert. It's an early Christmas present. I really want to go to this. And as we know, if you're a deacon and if you're all working in this world, you say, okay, we're going to do this. And you're always thinking about how we're connecting the church to the world and how we're seeing all these things because it's all connected, right? We never separate what we do from where we are in the world. So, okay. So I go to this concert with her. What struck me first is this artist started the whole show by saying, we're going to respect, and this is a popular person in the world. She's in the top 10. She's all the things. And I reluctantly went. But she started this show by saying, we're going to respect each other in this space. We're going to care about each other. And throughout the show, we're going to stop and we're going to do these moments of what I'm going to call mindfulness. Because, and she said this, I'm going to guess you don't tell yourself nice things about yourselves often. And I thought, well, this is going to be really interesting, right? Because we're in this stadium, we're in Denver, and it was packed. It was a packed stadium. And she just kind of kept saying that, the importance of loving yourself and caring for yourself and how important you are and how much you mean to people. And I'm in the South Central jurisdiction. We're in jurisdictional conference right now. I know you guys just started your jurisdictional conference. And I thought, wow, I hope they started jurisdictional conference this way, because if they did, we're going to be off to a great start, right? For the church. Because here's this person with this audience of, I don't even know how many people are here, who's telling people to respect each other and telling this group of adolescents and probably young 20-year-olds, well, and I'm not a young 20-year-old, and parents in the space, to care for each other. And this message of a positive mental health message for these kids. And then she did it every 3 to 4 songs. She'd stop and she'd say, okay, here we go. Tell yourself, and I actually wrote it down, I am special and I matter. And then she said, turn to your person next to you and tell that person, I am special and I matter. And just those moments, and I'm going to call them moments of grace, I thought, wow. Now, I wish this person didn't use so many profanities in her music, but there was some positive messages there. And my 13-year-old, who loves church, which I really love that about her, is able to take all these messages in. So I think a lot of this, I thought, what a platform that this person is using for that, for this positive mental health message. So I want you to think about that. No matter where we are in this world, we're modeling for people in this mental health way, and they're soaking it all in. They are taking it all in. So those things are just really, really important to me. And I think it's really important in how we model. And also in this time in the church, in this time And I was telling Kathy about this too. Man, if the church could get off the cycle of politics, I don't know if that would really help. I say this, and I don't know if this would really help, but we always seem to find ourselves when the Methodist Church is in a cycle of a general conference or a jurisdictional conference, we're also in the cycle of politics, and it all comes together. We're not separate, but midterm elections are with us. This is all happening kind of at the same time, and it's not separate. So how do we talk to our kids about this? I think it's important to be transparent in a way and talk to our kids in a developmentally appropriate way and find that space to be open and honest in those conversations in a way that you can talk to them and don't keep that hidden, because they're taking all that in. And of course, it affects their mental health. Like I said, even going back to Sandy Hook days, they're all going through in their schools active shooter drills. That's going to affect where they are mental health wise. So I hope this is all kind of making sense and kind of coming together. So I did want to go through some numbers. Here are the numbers. So according to the CDC in 2020, this is for children ages 3 to 17. 10.1% of children in the United States were diagnosed with ADHD. That's a huge number. That's that attention deficit hypertension disorder, hyperactivity disorder. That's where they're elevated. That's this idea of they are elevated in their response to everything. That's this whole serotonin level. They are elevated in how they respond and how they interact in all ways. So you're going to see in Sunday school classes, in church, in school, they are just up here in how they're reacting and responding. Some of that, I mean, there's a lot of theories and philosophies of where that comes from and why that is. You'll hear some people saying, oh, it's video games. Oh, it's they're in front of screens a lot. Oh, it's experiences. It's what they're hearing. It's what they're seeing. And it could be a lot of those things. It could be all in combined. When it comes down to it, we're seeing 10.1% of that. That's a lot of this going on with our kids. 12.1% have been diagnosed with anxiety disorders. That's huge. Anxiety in our children, 3 to 17, and depression, 7.8%. My guess is that's actually a low number, but that's a diagnosable number. So you can have symptoms of depression and anxiety and not be diagnosed with that. But those are pretty big numbers. 1 in 6 children ages 2 to 8 years has a mental, behavioral, or developmental disorder. That's a big number. So 1 in 6 children, 2 to 8 years, has a mental, behavioral, or developmental disorder. That's huge. And that's in 2020. I'm really curious what these numbers are going to look like here in another few years, looking back, coming out of 2020, coming out of COVID, because we had a lot of kids, sitting at home, again, with this kind of fear, what we had to do to keep people safe. And I recently was in a presentation, they were talking about this pandemic that COVID-19, and COVID-19 was the first pandemic we saw in the United States where church attendance did not rise. It actually decreased. And the presenter was talking about why, because it was the first pandemic in history that was politicized. Because typically, when you think about like polio, when polio came through, people were like, oh, they came together as a country. It was really, this one was just really different, for, again, a million different reasons. And we could talk for probably days about why that was or what that looked like. And this presenter went on to say, and he said, we're not going to get in a conversation, but think about if the Challenger happened today, what would that look like? How would we be responding to the Challenger as a country today? Would it look different? Would we be blaming? Would we be, taking the whole thing apart in a different way? So that looks different than it did. So our kids hear those messages and take that in. So now we're living with all these different things. We're living with COVID. We're also living with this whole idea of the economy. So kids are living in this really different world, this really different sense of reality and fear. And they're just taking all that in. They're soaking all that in. 1 in 3 high school students experience persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness. That's huge. 1 in 3. So this generation that in high school, so think about your years in high school, that yes, you're going through a lot. There's a lot of questioning. You've got a lot of stuff kind of developmentally and oh gosh, all that great stuff that's happening internally. That's all those great things hormonally that are happening. But there's should be a lot of sense of hope and excitement. But 1 in 3 high school students experience persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness, and 1 in 6 report making a suicide plan in the past year. Actually making a plan. And when you come from the mental health field and you hear someone making a plan, things get really serious. And that's a big, big deal, because often people may have fleeting thoughts. That's not necessarily abnormal that someone has a thought of ending their life. But when someone has a plan in place, that's when things get ramped up in that. And we know in this world, we do not have enough mental health therapists in place, trained to be in place for these kids. We just do not. Now, this next part, it's called an ACE event, ACE, which stands for Adverse Childhood Event. This is something that mental health therapists have been using for a long time. They've trained school counselors in using this. It's this 10-question kind of questionnaire thing, and it goes through, like, did someone go through a divorce? Was there something that happened in your life where you were abused in some way? You can look this up online. It's a pretty simple, standard kind of questionnaire that's been around forever. And typically kids will answer it their first session in therapy or when they go to the school counselor in high school or elementary, and they fill it out, and it helps the school counselor kind of determine where they are or what level of care they need. But in 2020, 71% of children and youth indicated at least one ACE event. And that's a huge increase. It used to sit at around 40%. That was a standard. And that includes a move, because moving indicates an ACE event because it's a stressor on a life. So these can be stressors or whatnot on a life. So up to 71%, that's a big jump. So it really indicates stressors on the life of our kids. And that was in 2020. So again, I'm wondering where we're sitting now with our kids. So we've got all these statistics, and there's so many more that we could be reviewing and talking about, but I don't want to get bogged down in kind of the hopeless, what feels hopeless, because I want to go back to what we were talking about at the beginning, because I really do believe that kids have this wonderful ability to adapt. And that word I don't like, pivot, but they do. And there's this wonderful movie that I always like to use, and it was called Wings of Desire. And it was at the very, very beginning of this movie that it shows these babies, and they're in these cribs, and they're just kind of cooing, and there's these angels. And the angels are talking to these babies, and these two angels are talking to each other. And one of the angels says, "This is amazing," right? Like, these babies can just look up and they see us. What happens? And one of the angels says to the other, "Well, because we tell them they can't see us anymore." And it's so sad, because I think that children can see each other. I think they can see the other. I think they can see the spirit. And we tell them that they can't. So with all of that, I want to kind of open up for discussion of what can we do? So where are we in this world? Because I've got this whole list of things, because I don't want to get bogged down in statistics of the mental health, what we keep hearing as the mental health crisis. And because we easily can get stuck in all of this and what seems like so sad of what these kids are going through. Because again, you can look at your just own experience, you can see these kids and what joy that they are and what happiness that they bring. And you can see that. So what can we do to just be with them? So let's talk for a minute. What have you seen of what's working in your world as far as building those building blocks of resiliency? And what does that mean? What has worked in your context? Don't be shy.
I haven't had the opportunity to use it a whole lot in a classroom since COVID, but I have used it with my kids. We had started a trauma-informed task force prior to COVID. So we looked into all of this research and did a deep dive. But the biggest thing is just listening and like really listening when they're talking and not kind of, being distracted by all the things around you. That was huge. I have a junior in high school and an 8-year-old. And the junior in high school has, oh wow, struggled with all the things you just mentioned. But being open with each other, being honest, and like creating that safe space where they know that it's okay to talk. I mean, their friends come over and they also feel comfortable talking to us because we've allowed our house to be this open space with open dialogue. I guess also feeling your feelings and really like letting them feel their feelings, even if it means they're screaming or yelling out their frustrations. They need to get that stuff out instead of letting it sit inside. Those are just a couple of things that we have used at home.
Absolutely. And Erica, I like how you said, don't let it sit inside, because if you do, this is that whole concept about therapy and about talking to someone, it just gets toxic. And if you just let it sit there and get toxic, it just like breeds and it will not let go. So Erica, what is it that you do? You're a teacher?
I am the children and youth director at my church, but
Perfect.
I have my teaching degree.
Nice. I love that. And you've got kids, there's this great, all this work about generational work. And I've done presentations in the past on generational work. And now I'm really curious about this Z generation and the alpha generation specifically. My daughter is a Z. And so you have a Z generation kid and you have an alpha generation kid. My daughter was talking to a group of her friends the other day, and they were saying, I thought it was the funniest conversation. They said, oh, the alpha generation, I don't think they have any idea of what it was like to go through COVID, because they're just, they just have no idea what it was like for us. It was just, it was a reminder of every generation's going to have their story. But yeah, you've got the both spread. And to think in the church, I still hear people talking about, what are we going to do with the millennials? Like, millennials are the early 40s. We're done with the millennials. We're done. Let's stop with that conversation. We need to be talking about the Z and the alphas, because those are the ones that, we need to be focusing on in so many ways. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Yeah, a lot of that being present and listening, understanding that we don't understand because we don't have a framework for this one. What has worked in the past is not working, is not, that whole same understanding. And that these generations of kids, I think, are much more open to talking about their feelings and to really letting them talk, and that it's okay to just use the language that they have, use the words that they have, and let them just dump. There's this whole therapy kind of modality that I really like, and I encourage you guys to read about it. Even look it up on Wikipedia. Wikipedia is always kind of a funny platform, but look it up. It's called ACT, A-C-T. And when you put it in, make sure to say ACT therapy. Otherwise, it's just going to tell you about the test. So ACT therapy, it's a really nice, again, therapeutic kind of framework modality. It talks about accepting the feeling, because, we've heard in the past the whole like, oh, get over it. You're going to get over it. whatever is happening, high school is just a whatever, you're going to get over it. Well, that doesn't really work. So ACT talks about, you're going to have that feeling, this feeling's going to come into you. How do you accept it? How do you take it in? How do you hold that feeling? And then how do you process that experience or what you're feeling, and then kind of try to let that on a river and watch it go. There's a lot of different mindfulness techniques when it comes to ACT, but it works really well with high school students and things like that. And people can use this, and it can be used. You don't have to be a licensed therapist to use this technique, but I encourage you to use this. And for those of you who work with, even like in Sunday school classes or whatever, look up things around art therapy and play therapy techniques and sand tray therapy. Again, licensed therapists don't own these things, and you can use these techniques in your classrooms. Anything to let kids and children experiment. Kids are tactile creatures. They like doing art projects. This is why you guys are the experts. I think Sunday school teachers are just amazing things. Vacation Bible school, all of that are amazing things because it allows kids to express and be tactile. I think the things that drive me the most crazy are the ones that are so regimented. So if you can let kids just explore, let them explore. So you've got all these things. The internet's amazing because you can just explore and let kids spend that time and let them tell you what they're thinking without words. So anytime you can let them do that, because they may not have the words to tell you what's going on, give them that place to dump so it does not become toxic, because we just don't have all the answers. So to give them that space and that ability to just explore and be and use whatever they can is a good way to do it. So other thoughts or examples of things people have tried that you have found useful?
I actually have a question.
Yes.
Are there degrees of ACE? In other words, moving versus I had a young man Saturday whose sister had committed suicide. That seems to me it would be much worse than a move. Are there degrees of that and ways to understand that?
Yes. So on that ACE score, what happens with that? So if they were to go see a therapist and they were to fill that thing out, so you're going to get an ACE score of, I think I have examples, that would come up. So they would have multiple, they wouldn't just have a 1 on that. It wouldn't just be indicator of 1. There would be several, and depending on what thing they would mark, the counselor or whatnot would see that, and they would say, okay, here's some things that are going to have me talk to them a little bit more about this, or this. So yeah, that would bring them on board in lots of different ways. And all of you who are kind of what would be considered those first frontline workers would be able to say, hey, here's some things that are kind of concerning to me. I'm going to talk to the caregiver and say, have you considered talking to a therapist? I'm going to do what I can to get you in to talk to a mental health therapist in the area. I think it's really important for workers in churches to maybe find people in your area that are mental health counselors to get people in. Huge list, because again, I know how frustrating it is, at least in our area, to find people that aren't on a 3 to 4 month waiting list. So to find those crisis lines and things like that. I'm so sorry that happened in your community. Are they were in your church? No.
No, but we were out doing a fair thing and giving away candy. The youth group was out.
Oh, like
we
a
were
trunk.
giving away candy. Yeah. And he happened to be actually on church property doing really amazing gymnastic things, but it wasn't safe. So, but the kids didn't want me to go talk to him. and ask that he find some safer place because they were worried about how sad he must be. So I learned a lot, and we did talk to him, and I've sent one of the kids who's really strong, who goes to school with him, to go and take my card and invite him to be part of our youth group and that kind of thing. So, and I just know his first name, and I know what high school he goes to. But he was out doing something physical, like you said, was out doing something physical. And he said, no, he said he taught himself to do that. It seemed like he did it. It's part of his spiritual practice, actually, or, mental health. That's like over the top awful. And moving is, so I was just wondering about the degrees.
Yes.
So yes, one of the things I would like to try to do is find some help for him if he isn't getting it. And he may be. I don't know much yet. But yeah, it occurred to me that there are all kinds of difficult things that happen. And you're right, every kid has at least one. But I just thought maybe there'd be degrees and levels of concern.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to say what a huge deal it was that people felt that you were the adult to go to in that space, that you've established yourself as the safe person to go to.
Well, thank you.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. Have you been at your church for a while?
No. Well, I started in August before we shut down for the pandemic. So we're just getting back now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're working on it.
There's these, and there's these wonderful statistics that talk about as long as a child has one person, only one person in their life that they trust, that they can go to, the impact that makes on that person's life is substantial. So if a child has, again, that one person, this world is, it's kind of this big, small world. So you never know.
Right.
That old kind of adage that, when you're at the grocery store, even when you're in a bad mood, if you can be just kind of a smile at a person is a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
And that you were in that space for that, these trunk or treat events we do, these outreach events we do. And when you're getting all your stuff together and you're tired and you're kind of grouchy, because I've been there, and you're like, oh yeah, but you're going to make this impact on these kids' lives. And you never know if there's someone that's going to come to you and say, hey, I need you to come talk to this kiddo because his blank or classmate or brother or sister had this tragic thing happen in their life. And I trust you to talk to them. Yeah. But you're right. These scales, they can be as simple as a move, or seemingly as simple as a move, to a tragic event that's going to impact in a really different way. So trauma sits in lots of different ways for people. But yeah. And there's that other word that we talked about that I mentioned, resiliency, that I think also got some weird play during COVID, really when we were in COVID time. But resiliency is really different than survival. So a lot of us, we survived COVID. That's good. Well, we all clearly survived COVID. Good for us. Yay. Woo. But resiliency takes a lot of skills, and it takes training, and it takes that daily practices of, physical and just emotional. We need to work on ourselves. We need to work on our holistic selves in lots of different ways to build resiliency. We're not just resilient, and that's okay. And there's days you're going to be resilient, and there's days you're going to be surviving, and to give yourself a lot of grace in all of those spaces is really important, but to constantly really be working towards those tools of resiliency, because then when those hard times come, they're going to be you're going to be able to handle those a little better when you're constantly working on resiliency.
Kelly, I don't know if it isn't
okay if I mention something?
Absolutely.
One thing that we do at my church in Sunday school, and I'm very passionate about holding a safe space for kids and letting them express who they are, however they're feeling. A lot of the time, to start Sunday school off, and we'll spend more time on this than the lesson a lot of the time, is giving them a safe thing for them to hold and play with. And then we talk about their week before Sunday, and I ask them to talk about one thing that didn't quite go their way, or something that wasn't quite so amazing that they wanted to share with us. And we talk about it all together so that they have their peers holding the space for them too, to, kind of reframe some things or to process some of the emotions that they didn't get to feel during the week. And then we move into talking about something great that happened or something that they're really excited to share. And I think that it's probably one of their most favorite times in Sunday school, is just that community time. So, yeah.
I love that, because, when you think about social media, what do we like to put on social media? We like to put on all the great things. So if you just go on that and you're like, oh, apparently every life is like amazing, except for mine. And so when you talk about, like, let's talk about what was not so great this week. And people can be with you during, I love your cat, can be with you during that time too, to say that's okay. That's normal to not have such amazing weeks and all the things are amazing all the time. I really like that. And that space gets just as much, if not more, play than everything else. That's a really loving space to give people, to give kids. I like that a lot. Yeah.
One thing I was going to say is the generations, I'm a millennial, and these kids, like, we had some kids who their dad died at church and their dad was the music leader.
Oh.
They came to Sunday school a few weeks later, like, my dad died. They don't, like, where we would be like, oh, their dad died.
Oh.
They're not like that. They just say it and they want to talk about it. They don't, like, where we would be like, oh, I'm so sorry, and you tiptoe around it. These kids, they don't tiptoe. And or like the high school kids will come in and be like, somebody brought a gun to school, and you're like, but they just tell you. They're so upfront about it. And so sometimes I have to be like, and how did that make you feel? Like, I don't, they're so blunt. They don't tiptoe around it. So I think that is one thing to keep in mind about, these kids these days. They just say it.
They just say it. They just put it out there, which is good. It goes back to the, like, don't let it sit and be toxic. They're not letting it be toxic. They're just, we're just going to say it and put it out there and put it in the world and let it be out there. Yeah. No, I think it's good. There's no more shame, like, to not put any sort of judgment, not shame, anything on it. Just kind of, this is what happened and this is what today was. Yeah. I think that's great. Good. And that you've given that space for that to happen, which is good. Oh, sorry.
I was just wondering how you deal with the parents of children who feel like their children have gone through so much with COVID or with drills in the school or shootings or whatever. And the kids, like Adrian said, just it's matter of fact, but the parents are struggling with it. And what to do, because the trauma is real for them too, because if your kid's hurt, you're going to feel it. And how you handle that, especially with this alpha generation, because when they were at home with COVID, most of them, their source of playmates and people who are caring for them were just their parents. My friend's little boy's 5, and until COVID, until he went to kindergarten this year, his mom was his playmate for a long time because of it. And he doesn't remember anything else because they don't have that memory when they're under 5. So those kids aren't so connected with other people in the church or willing to leave their parents when they come to church to be helped by others. And so then you can't really help the parents talk about it because their kids are with them.
That's true. And I think that's been a huge gap, right? And even in the school system, I know a lot of teachers And teachers are saying, okay, so now we're getting these kids who, academically is one thing, but socially is a whole nother thing. So you're kind of lopsided in so many ways. And then you have your school system who hasn't adapted to any of it. So you're trying to also be adaptable to all these things. And dealing with grief, I'd say grief is all over the place on this one too, because you're grieving the loss of, kids having this childhood that you wanted for them that they didn't have, and being socially adaptable and all of these things. So my thought around for the parents is there any way to give, and I don't know if anyone has had this ability to make this happen. This is something we've been able to do at our church, but I know it's not always possible to have. So we've had a group for parents during Sunday school. So basically pulled them from Sunday school classes that they were involved in pre-COVID. So it was nice coming back from COVID, just to establish a new class that they were able to go in, and they just did grief work. We didn't call it a grief Sunday school class. We just had a Sunday school class for parents coming out of COVID. So the kids were all in a Sunday school class together, and the people who taught that class were just told, let the kids do kid stuff and just run around, and they may be a little out of their what you would want them to be. They're probably not going to sit and do a lesson. They're probably not going to do any structured anything for a while. They probably just need to be in the outside, which we can do in New Mexico. I will also say we can do that most of the year. So they go outside and just kind of run around for a while. And the parents just sit around and they talk about how hard this has been. And we have books that we kind of pretend that they're going to go through a curriculum, which they don't do, because they just talk about how hard it's been to try to parent. So it's kind of worked as almost like a support group. So we've been able to do that. And now they're starting to do some sort of curriculum sort of thing, but it's really worked more like a support group. So that's what we've done. But I don't know if anyone else has done anything else that has worked.
We just launched a parenting class last week, and only one family showed up besides the facilitators, even though a lot of parents had asked for it. And it's not even that they don't want to come. I don't think it's that we don't have the capacity for it sometimes.
Yeah.
But they are doing a book study, and I wonder if that is overwhelming to them to do a book study instead of just meeting.
To even do that. And I think people are so desperate to get to some resemblance of what was normalcy, and trying to make up for time that was lost. I know I've done this too, like trips that have been rescheduled 3 times. And so all of a sudden I'm more busy than I was, before, trying to make up for all this lost whatever it was. And almost things have been ramped up recently in a way they weren't before, and hoping COVID was going to give a pause and a refresher, and things have just not gone the way they were. So I'm wondering if that's almost what we're seeing too with some of this.
Yeah, the other thing I've seen though is when I'm planning programs and planning studies or planning classes for the adults, or programs at the church where people come together, that they don't want the formal programs. They want, like my Wednesday program for adults, they want topical studies in case they miss, but they want fellowship time. That's the most important thing to them. They say, oh, it's so good to be doing this together. And they wouldn't even care if we had just time together. That's all they care about, more than any kind of formal study.
Yeah. Just to be together. Yeah. So I'm wondering, one thing I've really thought a lot about is going into Advent, is to do an Advent study, but nothing that requires any pre-reading or any sort of anything, just something that's really simple that can just talk about what does Advent mean? Something really loose. What are people doing for this season kind of going into? Because I would argue this is probably the first, and I don't know what's happened in your churches, but I would argue this is kind of the first Advent that we've been out of the fog. Because last year, I know here I think we were still masked. Some people, I'd say, I don't think we had requirements, but we still had probably half the congregation still wearing masks on their own, but it was happening quite a bit. So what are people doing this year in their churches and with children and youth kind of studies? What are you doing for Advent? Or have you even thought about it? News, it's coming up here in a few weeks. Just saying.
Right.
It's just-
I just got a curriculum today that I had looked through and really liked, and it's all about making Jesus more like a person, making him more like human. And it's called Now in Flesh Appearing, but it's kind of going through, and it's from Illustrated Ministry, but it's kind of going through your body. So it's the first week is your body, the second week is your brain, then self, then heart, and then everybody. So it's just kind of going through all the different emotions. But I started reading the first lesson, and that's like, oh yeah, like Jesus had to be potty trained. And I was like, we don't think about those things.
Well, that's funny. Yeah, that's true.
But
Yeah. And I think kids would love that. They're very like, yeah, they need
yeah,
that.
definitely.
Yeah.
We do art during Advent, and we're doing the Angels Among Us, Marcia McPhee churchwide, and I'm really excited about it because I think that idea that that refocusing on the angels and the message that they brought from God to us at every second of the Christmas story, of every part of the Christmas story. There's this messenger that's reaching out with hope, and that message of do not be afraid, that almost every one of those angels repeats over and over again through this story. And then we have we're doing sculpting and some frescoes, so it's all very tactile art. And we're really looking forward to that. And the kids, we do an art show every year. I'm not musically gifted, so a pageant is not in my realm. But it's just really a wonderful way to have them sort of touch and explore the story and internalize it in a really special way that I think is really good for your soul.
Nice.
Or that's my hope.
And I really think, those opportunities where you can do intergenerational work with the kids, again, I think that idea that they can connect with at least one person. And so the church can be these safe, sacred places that they want to invite people into and be a part of, where they can recharge and replenish and be in that place, that safe place for them, and be connected to, is really important for kids.
We find too that our attendance gets much more consistent during Advent at our church, and so it's a wonderful opportunity, and because it's the Marcia McPhee study, it is very intergenerational. Like everybody this time will be participating in the art. Every person's going to get a piece of paper to trace their hand to make an angel, one of the feathers, and then we'll have like a huge angel, the picture opportunities, the Instagram opportunity of the angel wings, where the family can take a picture in front of and everything, but that all the whole church will have made those wings. And so I just really am looking forward to it. We had the same conversation in planning that you were mentioning, that this is really the first Advent where there weren't any, where we were hopeful that we would be, even last year we were thinking, oh, when will we get shut down again? But we're hopeful that will not happen this time.
Yeah. And so for for our kids and our youth, I was talking about being at this concert with my daughter. And so after we had this whole conversation of, so here's this person that you enjoy, and talking about, the importance of telling yourself and others how important you are and you would be missed, how's the church play into that? And me bringing my own stuff to the table, thinking, oh, she's going to say, well, I don't need church because apparently this person's out there doing all the work for you in the world. You're kind of null and void on this one. She said, well, yeah, well, okay, so here's this person, but and yeah, I believe that God's here too, but then the church does all the rest, does the nitty gritty kind of work, does the work of continuing to tell me the how. So she's up here saying, yeah, you're important, but then I get to go to church and church tells me the rest of the story, the actual teachings of how Jesus tells me how to make this happen. So, in a time where I go to this and I think, oh, okay, well, here's this superstar who's doing my work, apparently. It's nice to hear we still have very much this place in the world and in mental health of our kids to bring about this work that we do during Advent, and of course, every other time of the year, that we have these wonderful opportunities to give our children that foundational work and our youth of the importance of the church in the world, of how we embed those lessons, of not just telling our kids how important they are and you're worthy, but we give them that safe space to come to us because they know to go to people to say, hey, the one person, the connector, this kid may need to talk to you. Be a safe space for these people. So we really play such important roles in the lives of these kids with all this stuff going on. So we are conduits, and I think that's important for us to remember.
I see it the opposite way too, that we're teaching that things that in our churches, and we're being there for our children and youth. And then you go out to the concert and somebody who's famous says what the church has already been saying to me. Oh, my church is right. Oh, look at that. There's more to it than, and I think it's validating what we're already doing before they go to that concert.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, we are there.